morning, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here and have this opportunity to, I say, share a passion about helping young women make healthy sexual decisions. The Medical Institute for Sexual Health has as its mission, the Medical Institute for Sexual Health has as a part of its mission to empower safe, healthy living by communicating objective and scientific sexual health information. So we call ourselves the information organization. And part of that empowering is actually to help parents, to help their young people to achieve their hopes and dreams. This book, Girls Uncovered, is co-authored by the founder of the Medical Institute, Dr. Joe McElhaney, who was a member of the AAPLOG board for a number of years. And the research was done at the Medical Institute. And I also consider myself an expert because I'm a wife of 43 years, mother of 4, and grandmother of 8. So a lot of my experience is practical experience. This book, Hooking Up, Hanging Out, and Hoping for Mr. Right, was written by Glenn and Marquette, and it really talks about how historically we have tried to protect our young ladies in their quest for finding a mate. And historically, when this has been done, parents and older adults have actively been involved in overseeing and guiding their sexual lives. And principally because mating is very important to the continuation, if you would, of the tribe. Yet it seems as though today we have older adults have actually distanced themselves from this and have left it up to the young ladies. And I can tell you that one of the results of that is that we're failing to guide them in their male-female relationships. And many of them have hopes and dreams that go beyond what they're able to achieve. So what we're finding is that far too often young women fail to achieve the very goals that they have set out for themselves. Part of it is not just because of their inadequacy as far as their native intelligence, but we have found that they're very vulnerable because of what is happening inside their brains. They're vulnerable to being influenced for good and for bad, and basically that's why they've been given parents, and that's really why we have written the book. Our American society has turned down this hedge of protection around young women, and we have actually left them essentially unprotected and uncovered. So, when I say uncovered, we give them no argument that would enable them to say no to the desires of young men for sexual activity, but we also have given them no reason to delay and limit their own inborn sexual desires, which are healthy and good, but do demand limits. And so, young people, and particularly our daughters, are in crisis. They may not think that they are. Young people rarely do think that they are. But their future is endangered if we are not giving the girls a reason to say no to their sexual desires. And also, we're leaving them essentially defenseless, if you would, for moral behavior. So now we're actually allowing society to convince the young women that they should have sex. We've actually normalized sex, especially in the teen years, and we've essentially said to them, all you need to do is be responsible, wrap it up, be safe. And I had an opportunity to hear a speaker recently from the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy, and he was touting the fact that we've now got the silver bullet, if you would, which included having the young people, we teach them to delay sexual activity, we give them condoms and LARC, and he spent about 2 seconds on delaying sexual activity and more emphasis, if you would, on the long-acting contraceptives such as Depo and the Mirena IUD. So we're actually disarming girls and giving them no idea or no encouragement to the healthiest behavior. So here are some of the common assertions presently presented as facts that would cause young girls to ask, why shouldn't I have sex? And so I'm going to ask you, like the previous speaker, to raise your hand if you have heard some of these facts, if you would, that are being presented. So if a girl becomes pregnant, it's her fault that she either didn't use the protection or she used it incorrectly. Okay? Girls can always get a guy to use condoms. Okay, nobody's for that one. If the guy uses a condom, there's no real risk of becoming infected with an STI. Yeah, they think it is a magic bullet. How about this one? If a girl becomes infected, it's no big deal. She can just see a doctor and get some antibiotics. Girls can have sex without any emotional attachment to their partner. How about this? Everybody's doing it. Okay, and that girls should feel free to engage in sex in the way they have heard that boys do, with anyone, anytime, anywhere, with absolutely no regrets. We're not robots, by the way. And one of the reasons why the young ladies hear these and accept them, and they're vulnerable to accepting them, is because of physiological things that are going on. For example, their brains are not fully mature until their mid-20s. And so young adolescence is characterized by being able to take risks and not be able to evaluate and see into the future the end or the consequences of the risk. And that fact has huge implications. The portion of the brain that is slowest to develop and last to mature is the part that allows them to see the consequences of their action, and is also the part that's associated with judgment, and that part is called the prefrontal cortex. So you can see here in this schematic of the brain, that very front part is also where the hormones, like dopamine, for example, have more receptors, and it's the dopamine that allows them to feel excited and exhilarated about any risky behavior, and also to want to repeat that behavior. It is actually considered a reward signal, and so the young people go chasing the high, if you would, of the dopamine, and sex is a very powerful experience for the brain and releases a lot of dopamine. So what happens is your life experiences affect the synapses that and what the interaction between the cells, and allows them to strengthen if that behavior is repeated, or if it is not, it actually dissipates. That life experience molds the brain until the brain sets in that behavior, and it is more vulnerable in those formative teenage years. This final brain structure then guides our thoughts and behaviors in the future, and we may be totally unaware of the influence that it has on us. The brain, good news, is malleable or plastic until death, so that you can make different decisions and get different results, but unhealthy molding may take many years and counseling to change. So, the brain's final structure is formed as a result of the experiences repeated over and over, and this pattern of behavior becomes who we are, not just what we do. And we are generally unaware that it's making us do things. I remember making a similar presentation to a group of high school students, and at the end, through the Q&A period, I asked, raise your hand if you had a question. And one young man stood up and said, "I didn't know the brain had anything to do with sex." So I'm thinking, you're in high school, you're given that. There's some older folks who probably have the same idea. But it really does generally make a difference as to what we do. Sex is a powerful brain experience, and the brain is actually called the largest sex organ in the body. And it's always molded by our sexual experiences, even a one-night stand, because that awakens, when you become involved in sexual activity, it awakens within you different urges and desires, and that is activated by sex and the hormones. I mentioned dopamine a minute ago, which gives you that reward for exciting behavior. There are two other hormones that are related to sexual activity, in particular, the oxytocin. There are more receptors in the female brain for oxytocin, and so oxytocin serves as a bonding or attaching mechanism. By the way, human beings are made to attach. We come here as babies attaching and bonding with our parents. And it's the oxytocin that actually allows a mother to attach and bond to the baby, but it also attaches her to the man with whom she is having sexual relationship. Additionally, it increases her trust for that person and reduces her defenses against that person. Vasopressin has more receptors in the male brain for that same type of behavior, which is emotional bonding. So a child's brain is actually very malleable at this time. And when young persons become involved with sex prematurely, they often sabotage and exclude their own desires for their future, dreams and hopes about what might have been. Parents sometimes forget and look away at other influences, and that's part of their protection. You've heard the expression garbage in and garbage out. When we do not pay attention or guide our young people, sometimes their thoughts and ideas get into their head, and garbage ideas are going to produce garbage results. Here is some examples of the influences that our young people are faced with every day. This is showing you how, well, you've seen these magazines, and false ideas of body image and behavior. And it's not just garbage in, garbage out. It's not just the young people not being responsive to it. But if they spend a lot of time, 80% of the top teen shows contain sexual content. And average teen views 14,000 sexual references each year on TV. This media influence ends up having significant impact on the young people. The average adolescent spends 1/3 of their day with various forms of mass media. And I was calculating this, 40 hours a week listening to the radio. That's a job. 8 hours a week on the internet. I mean, it's really interesting how the young people, and if you don't think it affects them, this shows that at 1-year follow-up of youth who listened to degrading music lyrics were more likely than those who did not to advance to sexual activity and have sexual debut. And it also affects their attitudes toward themselves, and young men, it affects their attitude toward the women. At a 2-year follow-up, 12 to 14-year-olds with higher amounts of sexual media exposure were 50% more likely to have initiated sex, beginning with breast and genital contact. And they were more likely, as I said, to have initiated sex. So how does this play out into the sexual lives of our teens? Well, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's done by the CDC in high schools found that in 2011, about 47% of high school girls had actually had sexual intercourse. That's penis in the vagina. And the reason I make the distinction is because there this was not uniform across all 4 high school years. Ninth grade girls were only about 33% likely to have initiated penile vaginal intercourse. But by the time they got to the 10th and 11th grades, we're talking about 44 and 53% respectively having initiated sex. And in the 12th grade, a full 63% report having had sex. However, if you talk to them specifically about other sexual behaviors, oral sex, anal sex, mutual masturbation, they didn't count that as sex. But at the Medical Institute, we define any activity that stimulates and arouses for sexual contact, whether it's mutual or whether it's coercive, doesn't matter. Any activity would stimulate you for arousal, at least by one party, would be considered sexual activity. And so may not just be penile vaginal penetration. So the same study looked at older girls, 20 and 21 and in college, and found that a full 80% of them had vaginal sex. And just as many reported having done with some of those non-penetrative behaviors as well. So it stands to reason that with that much sex going on, that you're going to get some consequences. So the consequences most people be looking for is just the physical pleasure, but going along with sexual activity comes sexual transmitted infection as well as pregnancy. So approximately 19 million new cases of STIs occur in the United States each year. The total number has been increasing. As a matter of fact, in 1996, the number of Americans with an STI each year was only 12 million. So this is a significant increase. And adolescents represent a full 25% of all of those cases. So if you look at the fact, if you look at the fact that half of the STIs occurs in 15 to 24-year-old, and the fact that adolescents only represent a fourth of the population, that means there's a lot of sexual activity, there's a lot of STDs, and there's a lot of consequences or damage that is going on. HPV is the most commonly acquired STI, followed by trichomonas and chlamydia, and these account for 88% of all of the new STIs. Here, we're looking at incidence and prevalence of the top 8 STIs in the United States, and you see in 1 year incidence, HPV is the highest, but if you'll note that as far as prevalence, herpes, and that is a full 45 million people in the United States have continuous infection. As someone said, it's the gift that keeps on giving. At least 1 in 14 girls has an STI, and that's between ages 14 to 19, which means that's all teen girls, 1 in 4 for all teen girls. But if you look at the second bullet, 2 in 5 sexually active young girls have an STI. That means those who are sexually active are really, if you would, getting hurt, because there are consequences. Let's look at the bacterial infections. Chlamydia here, the bullet points or the salient points of this would be that girls 15 to 19 and 20 to 24 account for most of the cases of chlamydia. And these are the young people that I see in my office. As many as 90% have no symptoms, so they actually transmit it to others without being aware that they have it and without the other person's knowledge. Gonorrhea, we're looking at another bacterial. 85% for females is asymptomatic, 50% for males, and it can be cured with antibiotics, but there may be pelvic inflammatory disease that results from it causing pain, infertility, and ectopic pregnancy. So those may not be able to be reversed. Pelvic inflammatory disease is we're talking about an infection of the internal organs, the internal reproductive organs that ascended from the vagina through the cervix into the fallopian tubes and the abdomen. And this may lead to infertility and pain and ectopic. Over 700,000 women a year are diagnosed with PID, and 70,000 are hospitalized. It's almost under the radar. Nobody talks about, they talk about pregnancy more, I guess because it's visible, but nobody wants to address necessarily this issue. Stages of reported cases of syphilis, as you can see, there is a significant primary and secondary risk of infection. HPV, 90% are asymptomatic. May have warts that will go away, but 90% persistent. 90% will go away within 2 years, but that 10% persistence is usually what's associated with the cervical cancer. And there's also significant here is the increase in oral and anal cancer as a result of the persistence. Herpes, we mentioned earlier. The point to mention here is that maternal and fetal transmission can occur with normal spontaneous deliveries, even without there being symptoms. Most people with that primary infection would deliver the person surgically with cesarean section. But you may have a primary infection, not even be aware of it, and pass it on to your children. I'm reminded of the story of a young woman whose husband had acquired herpes in college. She knew it before they married, and of course they were very careful to not have sex unless they knew that he was not symptomatic. She, during her pregnancy, apparently acquired HSV, was not aware of it, and when the baby was born, there were blisters that were present. So it is a significant disease, and this child will have it for the rest of her life. HIV, about 1.2 million living with HIV in the United States. And at the end, that's 48,000 new infections each year. At the end of 2008, there were an estimated 29,746 adolescents and young adults aged 13 to 14 who were living with the diagnosis of HIV in the 40 states that have reporting by confidential name base, which brings up another point. All of the states do not report HIV in a way that you can identify them and know that this is discrete infection. That kind of reminds me of the reporting for maternal mortality. But when one of the things that I also looked at, may not be aware of, is that in last year, the HIV awareness campaign from the CDC called Take Charge targeted African American women. And the reason they did was because their studies showed that black women account for approximately 60% of all new HIV infections. And that's a rate that's 15 times that of white women. At the current rate, nearly 1 in 30 African American women can expect to be infected with HIV in her lifetime. And that's about every 35 minutes, black women are infected in the Washington, D.C. area, which is, I consider an epidemic. And I'm not sure why we're not doing more than just having a campaign to make people aware. That's about 1 of every 5 people living with HIV in the United States that are unaware of their infection. And worldwide, 34 million are infected and 2.7 new cases occur every year worldwide. So we'll turn our attention now to consequences of non-marital pregnancy. In more than half, I would say, more than 500,000 women in their early 20s become single moms every year. That's about 1.7 million pregnancies among those women every year, and about 400,000 abortions. And you can imagine that they had dreams and goals that they wanted to accomplish, and this may not have been a part of it. They're more likely to live in poverty. They are less likely to complete high school, less likely to attend college, and more likely to remain single parents. They're also, young women who are involved in sexual activity are more likely to be depressed than their virgin friends. And in case you think that they had depression prior to sexual activity, this is something that was screened for and taken into account, so they controlled for those factors. Sexually active girls are 3 times more likely to report being depressed. Earlier I talked about the bonding nature of sex. Well, the nature of sexual activity among teenagers is usually the nature of breakup. And so when I've asked young people how often do relationships last in the teen years in high school, I've gotten range from 2 weeks to 6 months. And so if you can imagine that you bond and you break a bond, and you bond and you break a bond, that tears you emotionally, that tears you psychologically and chemically with those neurohormones. And so each breakup is a broken bond, if you would. And using the PET scans and MRIs, they're actually able to determine where in the brain this breaking bonding occurs. Just like there's specific bond areas for love and lust, then they are identifying it. It's interesting that there is a discrete area for love and lust, but there's only one area for pain. So whether it's an emotional bond that's broken, or whether it's a physical, surgical event, or a broken bone, the brain still registers pain. And so every time these young women and young men bond and break, it is a neurochemical event as well. The brain makes no distinction. So you can imagine why there would be a higher depression rate. So I'm getting close to the end. I've talked about how vulnerable the young ladies are. I've talked about the exposures that they have physically and emotionally. And now I'm going to give you a solution. I don't want you to leave here depressed. So, it's a multi-pronged effect in order to approach the STIs, the pregnancies, and the like. And the most common mantra, the current culture's mantra, is to tell teens, as I stated earlier, be responsible, wrap it up, and use a condom or contraception. And that has its positives, please, but it also is not the complete picture. Using interventions that decrease or reduce your risk do not eliminate the chances of these undesirable outcomes. So let's talk specifically about the condom effectiveness or risk reduction. In this particular busy slide, you can see that HIV, chlamydia, all the STIs on the left have been compared for the effectiveness of penile vaginal sexual activity as well as oral and anal. And you can see that the most effective comes with consistent use. That means that you would use it every time with every act of intercourse. The inconsistent provides some risk reduction, but may not be statistically significant. For HIV, it is most effective with 80 to 85%. With chlamydia and gonorrhea, syphilis, it's about 50%. And with herpes, it is even less. The difference is that HPV, the diseases that are skin-to-skin transmission are less effective than the ones that are fluid. And so that's one of the reasons HIV is a higher effectiveness, and why even with the risk reduction with the other oral or anal, you can see they don't have numbers there to say how effective it is or is not. With chlamydia and gonorrhea, even though they are bacterial infections, they still are not as effective because of the high prevalence of them and the fact that I say condoms only cover what condoms cover. Sexual activity is a fluid experience, a moist, wet experience, and so there can be leakage outside of the condom. Unfortunately, when a lot of the young people are given this information, it doesn't register, as I said, because they're vulnerable with their immature brains. And so you'll find that young people have a poor condom use rate as well. When you, at 15 to 19-year-old, we ask, did you use a condom at last intercourse? You have 66% for males, 44% for females, and it's unfortunately, you'd think the more mature they get, they do better, but for whatever reason, they are less likely to use a condom consistently and correctly as they mature. Young females are particularly susceptible to the STIs, and so without the use of the condoms, they're being even less protected. The other thing I wanted to say is there's the more partners you have, increasing your lifetime exposure to STIs, the more likely you are to get an infection. Additional caveats, I like this number here. Earlier I told you 47% of high school students have had sex. Well, actually that means that more than half have not had sex. But those who do are more likely to initiate sex earlier, and 6% were reported to have initiated sex before 13 years of age. 15% had 4 or more partners, and 30% had involved some type of drug or alcohol before their last sex. So of course, risk avoidance is the act of refraining from sexual behavior until you are in a committed relationship with a mutually uninfected partner. That would be ideal, but also confining that to the only true effective practical method would be committing with inside of the marriage. When you talk to teens about why they would choose, like I said, 47% have had sex, more than half have not. Conversation from the Kaiser Family Foundation or the research gave these as the reasons why teens say no to sex. Their reputation, personal values, their upbringing, and 9 out of 10 of the teens really agreed that being a virgin is a good thing. So virgin is not a dirty word. But they also indicated that it was consistent with their values, and many of them said with their religion. Or they said because they did not want to disappoint their parents. And so what we have found is that teens who are taught at home and at school and in the church, when they hear multiple messages that say wait, they are more likely to wait. And if they've signed the virginity pledge, they're also more likely to wait. So when they did the study from the national, this is from the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, 87% of teens wanted to receive a strong abstinence message. And most teens said they shared their family's values. And at least 55% said that they wish, those who had been sexually active, wish they had waited. So what I like to say about this slide is that teens want to hear from their parents. And so often the parents will say, well, just do what you think is best, or, you know, they're going to do it anyway. And the teens are waiting for mom or dad to say. Well, I can tell you, if teens say that parents influence them most, then I think parents need to also be empowered and encouraged to have those conversations. What are the dreams that young ladies want? Because that was part of the motivation behind writing this book with the compilation of information, and that is the actual, what was going on in the culture seemed to be different from what the conversations with the young ladies were saying that they wanted. They wanted, from the National Survey of Family Growth, to perform well in school, establish themselves in their stable careers, and all of this without sacrificing their marriage and family life plans. So it kind of sounds like I'm every woman. I can bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan and do all of this, yet their behaviors were different from their dreams and desires. And when they asked parents, parents' desires for their children, for their young girls, were very similar to the girls' desires for themselves. But this is actually what the U.S. Department of Education reports. 6% of girls drop out of high school because of pregnancy, or 25% cited motherhood. And when you look at the young ladies who finish high school, planning to go to college, fewer than 50% actually enroll in college. And more than 4 out of 5 of the young ladies said they wanted to be married. And not only that, they wanted to stay married. But there was a disconnect between what they say and actually what their behavior was doing. And I think it is because our culture has, quote unquote, normalized sex for teens. Their dreams and hopes were also being destroyed for a good marriage because they had gotten accustomed to hooking up and breaking up. And that bond that I talked about is weakened the more times you break and bond, so that you're more likely to divorce when you do marry because you've gotten accustomed to breaking those bonds. They're weaker, and they are harming their very desire to stay married. So, as I said, if they hear the message from home, church, school, the community, they're more likely to actually delay having sex until they are in a committed relationship. So what is society to do? We've talked about the problems. One of the things they can do is recognize and encourage parents, because young people say they want to hear from their parents what they have to say. We can combat the media lie that parental guidance is uniformly bad. We can stop repeating the lie that casual sex is good or even healthy, and expose the lie that cohabitation before marriage is a healthy and intelligent choice. I'm thinking about a young lady that I had recently who's cohabitated for 6 years, has 2 children. And when I asked her about future plans, she said, well, he hasn't asked me. So I think there's a lot of education that we can do in those cases. She's certainly not getting her desires because her behavior is inconsistent with that. Society can also, I believe, address the graphic sex in media, and we can insist that drinking laws be enforced. Parents can use their bully pulpit and their relationship with their daughters in order to communicate a lot of things, not just love and sex. But probably one of the most important things they can do is model the behavior. It's like I had one teacher tell me it's hard for me to talk to this young lady about delaying sex with marriage when her mom's bedroom door is a revolving door. But they could model. The health studies show that children are more likely to be healthy, happy, and engaged in good behavior if parents are with them at specific times, like when they get up, when they go to bed, when they eat dinner. And the statistics show that our daughters are at incredible risk where they live out in this world. This can happen without our knowledge and consent, but it's certainly important for us to recognize the threat to our girls, to cover them, if you would, with providing more protection about their sexual health and behavior, and help them to grow into their full potential of health, hope, and happiness. So I thank you for this opportunity.